Utah State University was founded in 1888 as Utah's land-grant college, 8 years before Utah even became a state. During the early years of the college, almost all classes were held in Old Main, and every student spent part of the day in the halls, classrooms, theater, and the gymnasium in Old Main. In the center of the central hall hung a large clock. "Meet me under the clock" was a regular refrain for Aggies busy with their academic and social lives. Today, Old Main has been joined by dozens of other buildings, and the first group of Aggies has grown to more than 22,000. Alumni are scattered around the world, but we want to invite you to come back and meet us under the clock for a look at how the old Utah Agricultural College has grown to become Utah State University, one of the strongest and most influential universities in the West.
Hi, I'm Bridget Farfel, and this is my co-host, Jay Evans.
You might have noticed the introduction was a little different today. That's because today's show is all about basketball.
And we're going to take you through the tunnel of time.
The 2003-2004 school year will mark 100 years of basketball at Utah State University. With the Aggies having one of the best seasons in school history, it's a great time to look back at the past to see where we've come. It was 1904. Utah State was then known as the Agricultural College of Utah.
They played before, I think, in an armory downtown. In fact, this wing of Old Main, the third floor, the north wing was the gym. Right across here where we're sitting, but the ceilings weren't big enough for basketball. One of the lady faculty members didn't like boys and girls running through the hall, what she called as half naked. The president of the university said, well, if you can find someone to pay for it, we'll build a gym. And she went to a guy named Thomas Smart, and he gave the money, and they built a smart gym, which is on where the parking lot is by the alumni house now. And around the gym at the top was a track. And like if you were in the corner, you couldn't shoot with much arch because the track came in over the top, and there weren't many seats on the side, and there were about 2 or 3 rows on top.
The game of basketball had been invented just 13 years before the Aggies formed their first group of cagers.
In a lot of places, the wire was often on the end, and some places early on, to keep the fans away from the players, they'd keep wire around the gym. And that's one of the ways that the phrase cager came in.
The Aggies went 2-2, beating Fort Lewis and the Deaf and Dumb School, dropping games to Brigham Young College and Weber State Academy. One major recruiting tool for the team was the class battles, in which seniors, juniors, sophomores, and freshmen had teams and battled it out for the class championship.
Friday, December 5th saw the beginning of a long interclass series in basketball. This gave all the men in school who could play a chance to show themselves, and the coach a good opportunity to pick out the men for the college team. These games were well played, and considerable class spirit was stirred up by them. Athletics editor, The Buzzer, 1914.
A season could be measured by the Aggies' play against in-state rivals University of Utah and Brigham Young University.
Just beating BYU would make a great season. In the latter part of the season, the Aggies were playing fast and consistent ball. In the last game, they sprung one of the athletic surprises of the year by gaining a decisive victory over the BYU quintet. Considered as a whole, the season was a success. Athletics editor for The Buzzer, 1916.
According to this measure, the Aggies didn't fare too well for their first 9 seasons, losing every game against their rivals. The Aggies continued to improve slowly, and in 1917 won the Rocky Mountain Conference with a perfect record of 9-0. After 15 years of basketball, the Aggies had a winning percentage of .446. Coach E. Lowell Romney was hired as the coach of the basketball team in 1919. His first
winning team. The first game with BYU was fast and showed a type of playing that was new to everyone. It consisted of close defense, quick passing, and long open throws at the basket. The teamwork was excellent, and our opponents were completely outclassed. Following this victory, Old Hard Luck paid us a visit. Andrews broke his leg. Tom McMullen came down with the flu, and Pesty Jarvis left to play baseball with Detroit. The Montana Aggie game was canceled because of the flu. The university refused to play us on the schedule because of sickness, and a few days later, Coach Romney was informed by telephone that the BYU and Crimson teams had abandoned the sport. Athletics editor, The Buzzer, 1920.
Luck turned for Romney and the Aggies as he coached for 22 years with a 589 winning percentage, 4 Rocky Mountain first place titles, a school record for the least losses in one season, and entering in the first ever National Collegiate Athletic Association tournament in 1939. In the NCAA tournament, the Aggies fared well, losing 1 to Oklahoma and beating Texas. In 1941, Romney's last season as coach, the field house became the new home for Aggie basketball.
During the Depression, they got money from the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, and both the University of Utah and Utah State built field houses. And the gym in the field house, if you go in there now, you know it's all empty, but the floor ran east and west toward the south end. And they had wire, kind of like heavy fence wire on the ends, and then people would sit behind the wire right under the basket. And Utah State's always been a tough place for visiting teams to come.
As the Romney era ended, the team went through some tough seasons, but nevertheless, Utah State fans continued to be entertained by some great players, one being Ralph Mon.
Ralph was a very good basketball player when he played up here. He was known for his one-handed long shots, and he had been taught that by Con Watts, who was his high school coach, and he taught a lot of them.
Shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941, the Aggie team lost players like Ralph Mon to the World War II draft, leaving Aggie fans without an official team.
Using equipment furnished by the school, these hoopsters organized an independent team, the Logan Collegians. Practices were scheduled and games planned. Under the coaching eye of veteran Orrin Curtis and the managership of Dale Lewis, the Collegians won 14 out of a heavy game schedule. Athletics editor, The Buzzer, 1943.
H. Cecil Baker, former player for Romney, took over in 1950 and coached for the next 11 years.
One thing I could say about Cease Baker is that he was an emotional coach, but he never showed his emotions. He was not a coach that stood up and yelled at the guys or walked up and down the side. He'd just stand up and watch them, and a lot of people found fault with Cease, and they said, he doesn't get excited, he doesn't get up and he doesn't yell and that, but that was not his manner. And but he was just as good a coach as so many coaches that are up there pulling their hair out and pointing. And
in the 1959-60 season, Baker and his Tossers posted a 24-5 record. They went to the National Invitational Tournament and won 2 of their 3 games there. The next year would be Baker's last. Arguably the best coach that Aggie basketball has ever seen was Liddell Anderson. In 10 years under his direction, the team went to the NCAA tournament 5 times and the NIT once. The team cracked the AP polls at 18th in 1962 and 16th in 1970. They finished in the top 25 of the coaches poll 4 times. Anderson's coaching was not the only factor contributing to the Aggie success. Some of the greatest players in Aggie basketball history played during this decade, including big man Darnell Haney, Aggie ace Cornell Green, and the high-flying Marvin Roberts. But who can forget All-American Wayne Estes? Ralph Mon, then a track coach, recruited Estes. They first met at a track meet in Missoula, Montana. After visiting Estes and his parents, Estes made the decision to come to Utah State University.
No one else wanted him out of high school. I mean, he probably could have been a great football player. I don't think there's any doubt he might have been an Olympian, according to Ralph Mon, in the track or shot put, because he's a very, very talented guy in baseball. I can remember how at first he seemed really, really heavy and soft and slow. And I think he's probably one of the most dedicated practice players that I ever saw. And when he was a sophomore and junior, they went to the NCAA both years. And And one year they beat Arizona State and would have gone to what's now the Sweet 16. He was always a magnificent free throw shooter. And he was also a pretty good passer. But again, he could shoot long shots. He was, a big guy for that day, maybe 6'6", 240, something like that. But he had a beautiful baseline hook shot. He had a real variety of moves. But the game he remembers is last one. It was a weird game. It was against the University of Denver, February. Because the team was struggling, you kind of went to see how well he'd do. And they double team and zone and everything. But I think when he died, he was averaging about 33 points a game. And I remember they had a forward, I think his last name was England, he was about 6'4", 6'5", that bragged that he was going to control Estes. Estes at that time was behind Rick Barry, he was the second leading scorer in the country. And I think he missed his first 4 or 5 shots. And he complained before the game about a numbness in his arms. And then he got hot like you would not believe. And he made, I think, 20 field goals, 20 out of 28 from the field, 8 out of 8 from the free throw line, had maybe 14 or 15 rebounds. He made 48 points. He went over 2,000 for his career, which was just a little over 2.5 years. And when he made that basket, put him at 2001, well, Dale Anderson, the coach, pulled him out, and the crowd, went crazy, and all his teammates went out around him. What they'd done is they'd actually gone somewhere to eat, and 4th North, the highway down the canyon, isn't as wide, or it wasn't as wide then as it is now. And someone had come down the canyon, hit ice, and careened into a light pole. And the accident, the ambulances or police were there, and they came by and stopped and walked back to see what was going on. And in the process, as the light pole had been hit, it had broken, and a live wire was dangling. And he was just enough taller than the other people he was with that it hit him on the forehead. And probably killed him immediately.
Most people could walk under it, but he being as tall as he was.
And you couldn't see it in the dark, so but he was electrocuted.
It was night after the game.
He was just 22 years old. And when you woke the next morning and heard that, that's a tragedy. Losing a game is losing a game. But to have someone die in that way, that's a tragedy. And it had an amazing effect on the community and on the campus. The memorial service, they filled the field house. It was a really tough time. They went on and finished the season, but it took them a couple years to get re-energized as a basketball team. And he will always go down as one of the greatest players in history here.
Over the next 20-year span, the Aggies were invited to the NCAA tournament 5 times, the NIT once, and began playing in the D. Glenn Smith Spectrum.
The Spectrum opened for the 1970-71 season. But, we're in the old field house, everything had been on bleachers, and you could crowd a lot more people in the Spectrum, everything was seat. And so people standing upside around the top and down the aisles and sitting. First year, they had some crowds of over 11,000.
One of those teams to go to the NCAA tournament was coached by Dutch Belknap.
I think Dutch was a great coach. I thought he was a great motivator. Of course, we had some good individuals on our team.
And featured such players as Mark Tenhovey, Rich Haas, and Jimmy Moore.
When we played at the University of Wyoming, we played up there, and I had 40 points that night. And it was one of those nights when you hear sports on Sports Channel, you hear they say he's in the zone. I was in the zone. It's like you can just close your eyes, and just throw it at the basket and go in. And that's what I remember about that game from the University of Wyoming. It was just one of those incredible games.
In 1978, 1 year before Rod Tueller took over as coach, the Aggies finally joined the Pacific Coast Athletic Association after playing as an independent for 17 years. Tueller's 1981-82 season was one that some Aggies would rather forget with the record of 4-23, but the next season the Aggies won the award for the most improved team in the NCAA, turning in a record of 20-9 and drawing an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament.
Rod Tueller is a very special person, and his record in state against Utah, BYU, Weber State, there's not another coach that comes close to the types of records that Rod Tueller was able to establish.
That same year, Aggie fans were introduced to one of the greatest scorers in Aggie history, Greg Grant, who holds the record at Utah State University for the most points in a career with 2,127.
House is now on fire.
In the last 10 years, under the direction of Larry Eustace,
Coach Eustace is one of the most intense coaches I've ever been around.
And then Stu Morrill.
Now, there's no question that Coach Morrill and his staff have done an excellent job, but they came into an atmosphere that was used to success.
The Aggies have made 6 appearances in postseason play, won 4 Big West tournaments, 7 conference championships, and in 2004 returned to national prominence with a top 25 ranking in the AP poll, which at one point reached the 19th spot after a 33-year lull. But as history seems to show, no matter who is at the helm, Utah State University will always be home to some great basketball.
They're fun. It's good to be involved. And Utah State in the sport of basketball is as proud as any in the Western United States.